My name is Leora, and I'm 35 years old, born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a house where everything was planned out like a blueprint for a perfect life. My parents, Judith and Thane, had a clear set of rules for their daughter: go to college, land a steady office job, marry a reliable man before 30, and settle down close enough for them to swing by on Sundays with unsolicited advice about how to roast a chicken. Every family dinner, the same question would hang in the air, sharp as a knife. So, when are you getting a real job? I used to nod along, pretending I'd follow their script, but deep down, I knew I didn't fit their mold. Growing up, I was the kid who'd spend hours chasing light through a cheap camera, capturing the way shadows fell on my grandmother's porch or how raindrops clung to a window. Photography wasn't just a hobby, it was how I made sense of the world. But in my family, it was dismissed as a childish distraction, something you did for fun, not for a living. My dad, Thane, a no-nonsense accountant, would shake his head and say, "Snapping pictures won't pay the bills." My mom, Judith, would sigh, her disappointment louder than words. To them, my dreams were a phase, like collecting stickers or wanting to be an astronaut. By the time I was 24, I was halfway through a business degree at UNC Charlotte, checking boxes on a path I didn't choose. I'd wake up every morning with this quiet, knowing question: is this really my life? I felt like I was suffocating in a box someone else had built. So, one day, I made a choice that shook my family to its core. I dropped out of business school and enrolled in a photography program at an art school. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, I knew what was coming. When I told my parents, my dad didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Photography's not a career," he said, voice flat. "It's a hobby." My mom's sigh was so heavy I can still hear it, like I'd just thrown away my future for a box of crayons. I didn't argue. I couldn't. Their words stung, but I wasn't going to let them define me. I packed a suitcase, said goodbye to Charlotte, and moved to Los Angeles with barely enough money for a month's rent. I didn't know if I'd make it, but I knew I had to try. That was the first time I felt a spark of something real: freedom, maybe, or just the chance to breathe. My family called it running away. I called it running toward myself. But even as I left, their voices followed me, whispering that I was chasing a fantasy, that I'd come crawling back when I failed. I didn't know then how long it would take for them to see me, really see me, or how much it would hurt along the way. All I knew was that I wasn't going to let their doubts stop me from building a life that felt like mine. Leaving Charlotte was like stepping out of a shadow. At 24, I landed in Los Angeles with a beat-up suitcase, a second-hand camera, and just enough savings to cover a tiny studio apartment that smelled faintly of paint and regret. I'd traded the predictability of my parents' world for a city that felt alive, buzzing with possibility. But possibility doesn't pay the rent, and those first months were brutal. I took every gig I could find: birthday parties, small weddings, even headshots for aspiring actors who paid me in coffee and promises. My parents, Judith and Thane, didn't let me forget I'd made a mistake. Every week, my inbox pinged with articles they'd forwarded: why office jobs are the safest bet, or the importance of stability for women. I'd read the subject lines, feel my stomach twist, and hit delete. I wanted to prove them wrong, but more than that, I wanted to prove something to myself. I started hustling, cold emailing magazines, showing up at galleries with my portfolio, and learning how to pitch my work through shaky Zoom calls. Slowly, the gigs got better. I landed a shoot for a local fashion brand, then a spread in a small magazine. By 27, I was traveling to New York and Milan, capturing campaigns for designers I'd only dreamed of meeting. The work was freelance, which my family equated to unstable, but it wasn't flimsy. I'd stay up until 3 a.m. editing photos, send drafts across time zones, and wake up to emails from clients in Tokyo or Paris. It was exhausting, but it lit me up in a way nothing else ever had. For the first time, I felt like I was building something that was mine. Back home, my family didn't see it that way. They saw a daughter who traded security for a pipe dream. My mom, Judith, would call and ask, "When are you coming back to reality?" My dad, Thane, was quieter but no less cutting. Once, during a rare visit to Charlotte, he looked at my portfolio and said, "Pretty pictures, but what's the retirement plan?" I tried to explain gently at first, then with more fire how my work was real, how I was booking clients across continents. But their eyes glazed over, like I was speaking a language they didn't want to learn. The conversations turned into arguments, then into silence. I stopped calling as often. They stopped asking me to come home for holidays. The breaking point came when I was 30, working on a major shoot for a luxury brand in Paris. It was the kind of job that could put my name on the map, but it meant missing Christmas with my family. I told them I'd try to make it next year. That night, my mom sent a single text, "If family doesn't matter to you, what does?" I read it in a cramped Paris apartment, the glow of my laptop the only light in the room. My hand shook as I set my phone down. I wanted to scream, to tell her I wasn't choosing work over family, I was choosing myself. But I didn't. I just sat there, staring at the city lights, feeling the weight of their disappointment settle into my bones. That moment changed something in me. I stopped trying to make them understand. I realized the farther I got from Charlotte physically, emotionally, the closer I felt to who I was meant to be. My career grew. I opened a small studio in Los Angeles, hired an assistant, and started getting invites to speak at photography workshops. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. But to my parents, none of it mattered. Without a real job or a husband, my life was just a pretty illusion. And when I told them I'd fallen in love, their doubts didn't just linger, they cut deeper than ever. At 32, I thought I'd built enough armor to handle my family's doubts. My photography career was soaring, campaigns in Tokyo, spreads in Vogue, a studio in Los Angeles that felt like a second home. But when I told my parents I was engaged to Maurice, a British film producer who split her time between London and LA, their skepticism hit me harder than ever. I'd met Maurice at a gallery opening in New York, where her sharp wit and quiet confidence drew me in like a magnet. She was my safe harbor, the one who'd listen to my late-night fears and remind me I was enough. I couldn't wait to share that joy with my family. I should have known better. I called my mom, Judith, first, my voice bubbling with excitement. "I'm engaged," I said, "to Maurice. She's incredible. Mom, she produces films, travels the world, and she gets me." There was a long pause, the kind that makes your heart sink. Then she said, "Oh, that's nice. Do you have a picture?" I sent her a photo of us in London, standing by the Thames, Maurice's arm around me, the city lights sparkling behind us. I thought it would make her smile. Instead, she texted back, "Editing apps are so good these days, aren't they?" I stared at my phone, the words blurring. I'd braced for her not being thrilled, but to suggest I'd faked a relationship, that was a new kind of hurt. I tried to brush it off, told myself she'd come around. But then came a family barbecue in Charlotte, the kind where everyone pretends to be closer than they are. I flew in, hoping to share more about Maurice. Big mistake. Halfway through dinner, my Aunt Alawan, who never misses a chance to stir the pot, leaned across the table with a smirk. "So, Leora, tell us about this fiancée of yours. What's her name again, Maurice?" Sounds like someone from one of those movies she makes. The table erupted in laughter, like I'd told a punchline. My uncle chimed in, "Bet she's a model from one of your photo shoots, right?" I gripped my fork so hard my knuckles turned white. My heart pounded, but I didn't say a word. I'd learned long ago that speaking up only got me labelled as too sensitive or dramatic. The worst part wasn't the jokes, it was the pity in their eyes. They didn't see me as a woman in her 30s, building a life I loved. They saw a dreamer who'd missed the mark, spinning stories to cover up her loneliness. My mom didn't laugh, but she didn't defend me either. She just sipped her iced tea and changed the subject. Later, I overheard Alawan whisper to her, loud enough for me to catch every word, "Poor Leora, probably made this Morris up to feel better about being alone." I stood frozen in the hallway, my chest tight, fighting the urge to scream. When I got back to my hotel, I called Maurice. She picked up on the first ring, her voice warm despite the 6-hour time difference. "You okay?" she asked. I laughed, but it came out shaky. "They think you're not real," I said, "like I invented you to impress them." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "They don't know you, Leora, but I do. Want me to show up and set them straight?" I laughed again, this time for real. "You'd have to deal with Alawan's interrogation." Maris's voice turned serious. "I'm real, I love you, and I'm not afraid of a few skeptics. Just say when." I leaned back, watching the city lights flicker outside my window. For the first time that night, I didn't feel alone. But I knew the hurt wasn't over, not yet. The hurt from that barbecue lingered like a bruise, but I didn't let it stop me. I threw myself back into work, shooting campaigns in Los Angeles and flying to Tokyo for a gallery exhibit. Still, my family's words echoed Maurice wasn't real. I was making it all up. I didn't want their approval anymore, but I wanted them to stop laughing. So when my aunt and uncle invited me to their 40th wedding anniversary party at a ritzy hotel in Asheville, I hesitated. It was the kind of event where my family would be in full force, dressed to impress, ready to judge. But Maurice, who was in London wrapping a film, insisted. "Let me come," she said over a late-night call, her voice steady. "I'll show them you're not alone." I laughed, half nervous. "They'll dissect you, you know. Alawan's got a sixth sense for sniffing out flaws." Maurice didn't miss a beat. "I'm real, I love you, and I can handle a few raised eyebrows. Just tell me when." I agreed, but as I drove to Asheville, my stomach churned. Maurice was still in London, tied up with a last-minute meeting. She'd promised to try to make it, but I wasn't sure she'd pull it off. Walking into the hotel alone felt like stepping into a lion's den. The ballroom was a sea of elegance, fresh orchids on every table, a string quartet playing under crystal chandeliers. My family was there, all smiles and polished shoes, acting like they'd invented the perfect life. I wore a sleek black silk dress, my hair swept up, but the moment I stepped in, the whispers started. My Aunt Alawan swooped over, her smile sharp as a blade. "Leora, still flying solo," she said, loud enough for the table nearby to hear. "Or are we waiting for that mystery fiancé from across the pond?" Laughter rippled around her. I forced a nod and kept walking, heading toward my aunt and uncle to offer my congratulations. I wanted to keep a low profile, blend in, and slip out early. But my mom, Judith, had other plans. As the MC called for family to share a few words, she nudged me toward the stage, her voice sugary, but her eyes like steel. "Leora, say something. It'd be odd if you didn't." I felt every pair of eyes on me as I climbed the steps, my heart steady, but heavy. The room was full of faces that had doubted me, dismissed me, laughed at me. I gripped the mic, looked out at them, and said, 40 years of love is something to celebrate. It takes trust and commitment, things not everyone gets to experience. If you have it, hold it tight. The room went quiet. A few polite claps followed. I stepped down, ready to disappear into the crowd. Then it happened. A low, steady hum broke through the music, growing louder, sharper, until it was unmistakable. Heads turned, glasses clinked as people set them down. The sound of a private jet's engines sliced through the evening air, coming from the hotel's private landing strip just beyond the manicured gardens. My Aunt Alawan froze. Her champagne flowed halfway to her lips. My mum clutched the tablecloth. My uncle's jaw dropped. The jet's door opened, and there was Maurice, stepping out in a tailored navy suit, her blonde hair catching the last of the sunset. She carried a small velvet box, her stride confident, but not showy, like she was used to eyes following her, but only cared about finding one person, me. "Sorry, I'm late," she said, her voice clear and warm, cutting through the stunned silence. Flight got held up, a few nervous chuckles broke out, but most of the room was speechless. She walked straight to me, took my hand, and whispered, "Did I make it?" I nodded, my eyes locked on my mum, who sat rigid in her chair, hands white-knuckled. Maurice turned to the MC with a polite smile. "I'm not here to steal the show, but if anyone's wondering whether I'm real, I hope this clears it up." The room exploded not in laughter, but in wide-eyed murmurs, heads craning, a wave of shock rippling through the crowd. Maurice didn't just show up, she changed everything. She shook hands with Alawan, who's notorious for judging people by their watches, and said, "Leora mentioned you used to plan events for Charlotte's Elite. I'm working on a film premiere in London, maybe we could swap ideas." Alawan nodded like a bobblehead, too flustered to critique. Maurice chatted with my uncle about the film industry, making him laugh like they were old friends. My mum stayed silent, her eyes darting between us. Maurice didn't avoid her. She walked over, offered a firm handshake, and said, "Judith, it's a pleasure. Leora's told me so much about you." My mum managed a nod, her voice barely audible. "I've heard about you too." It's clearer now. For the first time, I felt the ground shift beneath me, not out of revenge, but relief. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. Maris's arrival at that Asheville party didn't just silence the room, it cracked something open in my family. For years, I'd been the dreamer they pitied, the one who'd strayed from their perfect plan. But seeing Maurice step off that jet, real and radiant, forced them to pause. I didn't expect apologies or grand gestures, my family wasn't built that way. Still, in the weeks that followed, I noticed changes, small at first, like ripples spreading across a still pond. The first sign came a few days after the party. My dad, Thane, who'd always treated my photography like a childish whim, sent me a text. It was a link to an article about a rising star in the photography world, someone whose work had just been featured in a major gallery. Underneath, he wrote, "You're doing better than I gave you credit for." I read it 3 times, sitting in my Los Angeles studio, the hum of the city outside my window. It wasn't a heartfelt confession, but coming from a man who'd once called my career a hobby, it felt like a door creaking open. I didn't reply right away. I just let the words sit with me, heavy and strange. Then there was my mom, Judith. She'd never been one for social media, but a week after the party, she posted a photo of me and Maurice in the family group chat, the one usually filled with recipes and church reminders. It was a candid shot from the anniversary, us standing by the dessert table, Maris's hand on my shoulder, both of us smiling. The caption read, "Leora's got a good eye for partners." My Aunt Alawan, who'd marked me mercilessly, commented, "Maurice is a catch." My uncle dropped a thumbs-up emoji. No one mentioned the fake fiancée jokes or the years of whispers. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing I'd ever gotten to acknowledgement. I stared at my phone, a bittersweet warmth settling in my chest. The biggest surprise was my younger brother, Gideon. He was 28, the golden child who'd followed the family playbook: business degree, steady job, house in the suburbs. He'd been a loud skeptic, once texting me, "Your fiancé sounds like a movie script." But a few weeks after the party, he called me late one night. I was editing photos in my studio, the glow of my laptop casting shadows on the walls. "Leora," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard. "Maurice, she's not what I pictured." I leaned back in my chair, bracing myself. "What's that supposed to mean?" He hesitated, then said, "I mean, she's real, and she's kind of amazing." I didn't think someone like that would show up for our family. I didn't respond right away, letting his words hang in the air. Then he added, almost a whisper, "If I ever said anything out of line, I was just worried you'd get hurt." It wasn't a full apology, but for Gideon, it was a leap. I swallowed hard and said, "Thanks for saying that." We didn't linger on it, but something between us felt lighter. These moments weren't loud or dramatic. They came quietly, like the first signs of spring after a long winter. My family wasn't suddenly perfect. They'd never be the cheerleading squad I'd once hoped for. But they were starting to see me, not as the daughter who'd failed their expectations, but as someone who'd built a life worth noticing. At the party, the pity in their eyes had shifted to curiosity, maybe even a flicker of respect. My mom stopped sending me articles about stable careers. My dad asked, just once, how my latest shoot went. Small steps, but they meant the world. Still, I knew the journey wasn't over. The hurt from years of doubt didn't vanish overnight, and I wasn't sure if my family would ever fully understand me. But for the first time, I felt like I wasn't shouting into a void. Maurice had stood by me, and that gave me the strength to keep going. Little did I know, the biggest test and the deepest truth was still waiting, ready to change everything. The changes in my family after that Asheville party were small but real, like cracks letting light into a dark room. I carried that fragile hope with me, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. 3 months later, I got an invitation to speak at the International Photography Festival in Sydney, a gathering of artists, curators, and innovators from around the world. Maurice was also invited to join a panel on the future of filmmaking. They wanted me to share how I'd built a global photography brand from scratch, without a single investor. I read the email in my Los Angeles studio, sunlight spilling across my desk, and felt a surge of pride. This was my moment, not just to shine, but to show my family who I'd become. I did something impulsive. I grabbed 2 of the festival's cream-colored invitations, wrote by hand, "You once asked if I was serious about my life. This is my answer." I signed my name, Leora, sealed them with a wax stamp, and mailed them to my parents, Judith and Thane. No email, no warning. 4 days later, my mom called. "What should we wear?" she asked, her voice clipped but curious. I smiled into the phone. "Evening attire, nothing flashy. Sydney will handle the rest." They arrived on a golden afternoon, the kind that makes Sydney glow like a postcard. Maurice picked them up from the airport in a sleek electric car, not to show off, but to keep things smooth. Our apartment was on the 42nd floor of a glass tower, all white and olive tones, with Italian stone floors and a balcony overlooking the harbour. A mark-up for an Iceland shoot sat on the coffee table. My mom stepped inside, her eyes scanning the space, lingering on a framed photo I'd exhibited in London. She touched the edge of a walnut table, started to say something, then stopped. My dad stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring at the water. After a long silence, he said, "I never pictured you living like this." I didn't respond. I just handed them glasses of mint tea Maurice had brewed, and showed them the building's hanging gardens and infinity pool. That night, I stepped onto the festival's main stage in a tailored white blazer, my hair in a low bun, wearing only pearl stud earrings. Maurice sat in the front row with my parents, the spotlight casting a soft haze over the crowd of 400. I didn't start with awards or clients. I spoke about what it felt like to be underestimated, to sit at a family table and feel invisible. There were days, I said, when I lived on nothing but belief in myself, because no one else offered it. The room was silent, every word sinking in. Then I shared something I'd kept buried for years. I found out my mom, Judith, spread the rumor that Maurice wasn't real, I said, my voice steady but soft, not because she doubted me, but because she was afraid of me loving a woman, afraid of what our conservative family would say. I don't blame her fear. I forgive it, because I chose to live my truth, no matter the cost. The room held its breath. I glanced at the front row. My mom's hands covered her face, tears slipping through her fingers. My dad sat rigid, his eyes locked on me, unblinking. When I finished, the audience rose, their applause thundering through the hall. I stepped off the stage into a whirlwind of handshakes and business cards. A curator from Paris wanted me for a solo exhibit. A publisher pitched a memoir. My dad stood beside me, nodding to people like he'd been part of my journey all along. Later, at a rooftop dinner, my mom pulled Maurice aside. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick, "for believing in Leora when we didn't know how." Maurice smiled gently. "No need to thank me. Leora did this herself." I just stood by her. After dinner, my mom found me on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below. She smoothed the shoulder of my blazer, like she used to when I was a kid heading to a school event. "You spoke with such honesty," she said, her voice breaking. "I was so scared you'd fail. I didn't see you'd already won your own way." I rested my hand on hers. "I know, Mom. I just wished you'd trusted me sooner," she nodded, tears welling. "I wish that too, but I'm here now, and I won't doubt you again." My dad approached, his hands in his pockets. "I thought art was a game," he said, his voice low. "Tonight, I saw how people listen to you. You're not just making pictures, you're making a difference. I'm proud of you, Leora." Those words, ones I'd never heard, landed like a quiet earthquake. I nodded, my throat tight, and for once, I didn't need to say more. Sydney was a turning point, but it wasn't the end. Back in Los Angeles, I felt different, not because my family had changed overnight, but because I had. For years, I'd carried their doubts like a weight, always trying to prove I wasn't the failure they saw. Now that need was gone. I'd stood on that stage, spoken my truth, and watched my parents' eyes shift from skepticism to pride. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. I was free. Life moved fast after the festival. I got an email from the organizers saying they wanted to feature my speech as the opening for next year's program. They sent me the excerpt they'd chosen. Some grow up with support, some fight through doubt. Whoever you are, if you believe in your path, don't wait for permission. Keep walking, let them catch up. I read it in my studio, sunlight streaming through the windows, a markup for an Iceland shoot open on my screen. My phone buzzed. A client in Singapore wanted to discuss a new campaign. My calendar was packed, Florence, Tokyo, New York, but I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt light, like I'd finally let go of something I'd been carrying too long. My family wasn't a fairy tale now. There'd still be moments when my mom, Judith, would hesitate, or my dad, Thane, would ask a cautious question about my plans, but they were trying. The group chat, once a graveyard of casserole photos, now had my mom sharing articles about photography exhibits. My dad called once, out of the blue, to ask about a shoot I'd mentioned. Small gestures, but they felt like bridges being built, one plank at a time. That freedom wasn't just about them seeing me, it was about me seeing myself. I didn't need their approval to know my life was real. Maurice, my rock, reminded me of that every day. One night, as we sat on our balcony with a bottle of chilled wine, she looked at me and said, You don't just make them see you anymore. You make them believe in you. I leaned my head on her shoulder, listening to the city hum below. She was right. I'd stopped fighting for their validation and started living for my own. I kept the invitations I'd sent my parents, tucked in a drawer by my bed. Sometimes, I'd open it and trace the words I'd written. This is my answer. I'd smile not because I remembered the cold dinners or the mocking laughter, but because I remembered the moment they sat in that Sydney auditorium, clapping longer than anyone else, with nothing left to say. My victory wasn't in proving them wrong. It was in staying true to myself, long enough that they couldn't look away. I don't need everyone to understand every late-night edit, every flight I've taken, every risk I've embraced. I don't need them to love, Maurice, or cheer for my work. I just needed to invite them to see me, not to win, but to stand tall without bowing my head. That's what made me free, and if I can do it through all the doubt, all the noise, then anyone can. Your path is yours, walk it, and don't look back.